Today's case brings us to the small town of El Rancho, New Mexico. With a population of just 1,500, it's a close-knit community where everyone knows each other and families are known for their honesty and hard work. In 2011, the Ortiz family was a cherished part of this community. The family consisted of Dixie, the mother, Lloyd, the father, and their children, Sherry, Angela, and Stephen. Lloyd and Dixie had been married for 34 years and were seen as key figures in the town. Angela described Dixie and Lloyd as exceptional parents in countless ways. They never judged anyone, always embraced people for who they were, worked harder than anyone she knew, and supported everyone around them. Lloyd worked as a tile contractor, starting his day before dawn and often working past 9 at night. Dixie worked at a nursing home, a job she never viewed or spoke of as mere work. She just genuinely loved helping people. In 1989, when Angela and Sherry were teenagers, Dixie and Lloyd met 7-month-old Stephen and instantly fell in love with him. They soon adopted him, and his sisters said their family felt so perfect and complete. Stephen had cerebral palsy, and his left side was paralyzed. The family were told that it was a tough road ahead. He may never be able to walk or talk and would need assistance with a lot of things in life. Through immense hard work both physically and mentally, lots of love and encouragement, Stephen overcame everything. Doctors said he never would. He was soon walking and talking, as well as reaching huge developmental milestones. The family would attend church, and Stephen was always the star of the show. His pastor said he would walk in and greet every single person there. He was a joy to be around, and everyone adored him. 2/3 of the Ortiz family home was occupied by Dixie, Lloyd, and Stephen, and Sherry and her husband Jesse, and their 2 children lived in the other part of the home, which was separated by a fence. For the family that had always been so close, this was the perfect living arrangement. June 18, 2011. Sherry and Jesse spent some time at the casino before coming home and watching a film. Sometime in the early hours of the morning, Sherry and Jesse heard a noise outside, and the dog started barking. Jesse got up, grabbed his gun, and looked outside. He saw a gray car driving away and heard someone shouting, "Hurry up, let's go." He got in his truck and followed the car for a while before losing it. He then drove back home and the family went to sleep, thinking, although it was odd, it was likely just teenagers messing around. Several hours later, June 19th, Father's Day, when investigators arrived on scene, they discovered Dixie in the master bedroom in her pajamas with trauma to her head. Lloyd was found in the backyard and had sustained 7 injuries to his head and torso. 21-year-old Stephen was dead on the kitchen floor. It was clear that he had tried hard to fight off his killer, but he was struck 17 times in total and succumbed to his injuries. The ferocity and level of rage that the perpetrator had was shocking to everyone there. One officer said it was the worst crime scene he had ever been called to. Everyone in the community was frightened and shaken. Things like this just didn't happen. And the fact that a family like the Ortizes had been subjected to this left everyone fearing that their families could be next. Lloyd's wallet was on the kitchen counter next to Stephen's body, but it was still full of money. So initially, it seemed that robbery was not a motive. There was no DNA of an outsider inside the family home, and police knew they were up against it unless they could find the murder weapon. At the back of the property, behind a locked fence, were several marijuana plants. Angela and Sherry explained that their parents had a medical marijuana card for Stephen, as well as a license to grow it for him. After 2 brain surgeries, Stephen had been prescribed it to ease his constant and very debilitating headaches. Authorities wondered if the wrong person had found the plants and broken in to try and steal them rather than the money or valuables inside. But it soon came to light that Lloyd and Dixie had a secret safe hidden at the back of their closet. A safe so secret, even their children didn't know about it. And this presented more motive still. The autopsy results soon came in. The wounds were so deep that everyone initially thought it was a gun at point-blank range. But the results later revealed that the family had been killed with a pickaxe. Sherry said when she and her husband had heard someone outside that early morning, Jesse had jumped into his truck and started following the car. But Jesse's first story contradicted this, and he told officers he only went and stood outside. He didn't follow anyone. He then changed his story and said he might have missed that part out. Officers definitely found this odd, as it was a pretty big thing to forget, and they wondered if Jesse had more to tell them. Jesse admitted that he and Lloyd had argued on occasion, but he said it was all over stupid and petty things, and they were forgotten as soon as they happened. Authorities couldn't rule anything out though. No matter how small something seemed, there could always be more to it. They searched Jesse and Sherry's part of the home. Nothing came back forensically, and the CCTV from the casino also lined up. With this, police were officially able to rule out Jesse and Sherry as playing any part in the deaths. Hoping the killer had just dumped the pickaxe somewhere near the home, authorities were looking everywhere for the murder weapon. And remarkably, they found it just a short distance away in a field near the Ortiz family home. It weighed 5 pounds and was still covered in blood. Praying this would be an open and shut case very soon, they sent it off for testing. But sadly, the only DNA that came back was from Lloyd, Dixie, and Stephen. There was nothing else on it. Angela told the police that there was one person they might want to talk to, a 16-year-old called Nicholas Ortiz. There was no relation between him and the Ortiz family, but he was close with Sherry's son and the pair would hang out at school. He went to the same church as the family and his pastor said he was helpful, always staying late to tidy up and friendly. After frequent bouts of difficulty, volatility, and fighting at home, Sherry offered a room to him hoping it would help and give him some stability. Nicholas would also spend time at Lloyd and Dixie's, and they treated him well, often driving him around whenever he needed a lift and cooking him dinner. But this all changed when Sherry and Jesse noticed money was going missing before walking in on Nicholas going through their things. Instead of asking him to leave, they saw it as a cry for help and decided to give him money for the contributions he was making around the home, hoping this would stop the stealing. But Nicholas's attitude got worse, and his behavior was making Lloyd and Dixie more and more uncomfortable. After finding him hiding in the garden after jumping over the fence, eventually Lloyd told him to leave the family alone and go back to his parents' house. Nicholas was found and questioned. He appeared honest and open about everything, including the tension between them all when he was asked to leave the house. As well as this, he said he was at home that night. He woke up his dad to wish him a happy Father's Day just after midnight and saw his mom off to work at 7 a.m. This was corroborated by the family, and the police continued their searches. Time was slipping away fast. The Ortiz family murders was among the state's most disturbing unsolved cases, and police were worrying that with no DNA evidence, it might remain a cold case forever. But one call would finally come in that changed everything. A woman currently serving time in prison told police she had information on what had happened to Lloyd, Dixie, and Stephen. She told law enforcement that there was a reason for the lack of evidence. She actually knew the attacker, and he had been wearing socks over his hands at the time of the assault. This caller was 24-year-old Ashley Roybal. She had a string of convictions, including burglary and drugs-related charges. She claimed that on the night of the murders, she was smoking weed with her cousin, Jose, who was 15 at the time, and his friend, none other than Nicholas Ortiz. Jose and Nicholas decided they needed more money, so they hatched a plan to steal from the Ortiz family. Nicholas was somehow aware of the safe in the family home and was out to steal $20,000 from it. As well as this, he said he wanted to steal the plants too. Ashley drove them to a road near the Ortiz family residence at around 3 a.m. She then drove home. Ashley said she was in a gray car, a car similar to the one Jesse said he had seen driving that early morning. 45 minutes later, at 3:45, she got a call from Jose. He said he had panicked last minute and couldn't go through with it. He could hear dogs barking and some families were still awake. And although Nicholas had tried to convince him, he refused. He watched as Nicholas walked up to the back door and knocked. Jose said he realized the gravity of the situation and ran and hid behind the house. After this, Nicholas called Ashley, telling her she needed to pick him up from outside the Ortiz's house. As soon as the pair got in the car, it was obvious that something horrific had happened. He had blood on his trousers, a sock on his right hand, and a bin bag tied around his right leg. He was in a panic, saying over and over, "I messed up. I killed them." Ashley said she drove him to her grandparents' house so he could take a shower. His bloody clothes were put in a bag and disposed of, and he was given new clothes to walk home in. The next day, Nicholas called Ashley saying he killed the family with a pickaxe before discarding of it outside the house. But officers did have questions. Not only did Nicholas appear to have an alibi, the car in question had been sold on and later crushed at a scrapyard. 18 months had now passed since Father's Day 2011, and the vehicle was long gone. They started looking into the only thing that had lasted over the years: phone records. Records showed a lot of communication going back and forth between the three of them that night in June 2011. They called in Nicholas again and asked him about the text messages. He quickly asked to stop the interview. Over the next few months, they continued building their case. And 3 years after the killings, in 2014, officers turned their attention to Jose to get his side of the story. He told them the same story as Ashley. Eric Zabilla, another one of Nicholas' friends, became the third person to tell the officers the same thing. He said Nicholas had said he had killed people but would not specify who. It was only when he heard about the Ortiz family he thought he had connected the dots. He went straight to the police 2 days later, but the full story was still unknown. And although this was logged, it still took a long time to obtain an arrest warrant. But that day finally came. On February 12, 2015, Nicholas Ortiz was placed under arrest with 5 charges against him. When he was read out the charges, he said, "I don't agree with 2 of them." The detective recalled it was very telling that the only 2 he didn't agree with had nothing to do with murder. And he said this was as close to a confession as he could get. Sherry, Jesse, and Angela were in a state of shock. The teenager they had taken in as their own, fed, given money to, and a bed to sleep in, had turned on them all in such an unimaginable way. He was initially denied bail, but this was changed to $100,000, which was made, and he was let out. In June 2015, his trial began. Both Ashley and Jose were set to testify against him in exchange for plea deals. Ashley pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit aggravated burglary and tampering with evidence and was given 20 years in prison with 6 years of her sentence suspended. So she will remain in prison for 14 years, unless she gets parole any earlier. Jose was given full immunity and was never charged with any crimes. Although he was a minor at the time of the murders, given how disturbing the crime scene was, the district attorney fought for him to be tried as an adult, which allowed for them to push for a higher sentence if he was found guilty. To everyone's surprise, in the middle of the proceedings, Jose changed his testimony. He said that Ashley was the ringleader and she had instructed both him and Nicholas to rob the home and kill the family. He said she gave them socks to cover up their hands and plastic bags for their feet and gave Nicholas the pickaxe. Nicholas didn't take the stand the entire trial, leaving Ashley and Jose with opposite statements, fighting against each other. After 3 days of deliberations, the jury was stuck. They hadn't reached a verdict on any counts, and they simply couldn't agree. A mistrial was declared. Everyone thought that the case was as strong as it could possibly be, but it meant that a new trial would have to take place, leaving the family to go through it all again. The case went back to trial 17 months later, and this time there was a very different result. Nicholas Ortiz was found guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of aggravated burglary with a deadly weapon, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit aggravated burglary with a deadly weapon. Sherry started a petition, begging the judge to give Nicholas 3 consecutive life sentences. He got credit for time served since his first arrest and was required to serve 85% of his sentence. Nicholas filed an appeal, but it was denied. It's possible he could be out of prison in his early 40s, being able to apply for parole in late 2036 or early 2037. Angela said it was hard to feel like any closure had been gained and any justice had been served. The district attorney said while he was disappointed, he was happy that it had been categorized as a serious violent offense. The community of El Rancho and the family and friends of Lloyd, Dixie, and Stephen will forever be affected by what happened back in June 2011. Sherry and Angela waited more than 8 years to get justice for them, but they are still left feeling that justice simply didn't happen. Hardworking, giving, and doing everything they could for everyone they met. The deaths of Lloyd, Dixie, and Stephen Ortiz was and will always be a huge loss to the community and everyone that knew them. It is only right that they be remembered for the joy and happiness they brought to so many people, and not by the tragic way that they left this earth. Discover the chilling world of secret crime mysteries, where we delve into the most perplexing cold cases and unsolved crimes. Join us as we unravel hidden clues and explore haunting mysteries. Subscribe now and be part of the journey to bring these cases to light. 42-year-old Megan Marone may not excel at small talk, but she thrives on exploring deeper concepts and grand ideas. Idealistic and fervently passionate about social issues such as climate change, she is actively involved in activism and regularly participates in demonstrations. Megan is highly intelligent with a profound appreciation for literature and poetry. While residing in Troy, New York, she launched the Troy Poem Project, where she set up a typewriter in public spaces and local events, crafting poems for passersby after engaging in brief conversations to understand them better. Megan has channeled her love for language into her career as an English teacher. In 2022, she was a teacher at Shaker High School in Latham, New York, where she had been employed for 3 years. She was dedicated to her students, but not all of the aspects of her job were positive. On March 24, 2022, she went on paid personal leave for the remainder of the school year. The exact reason Megan went on leave has not been publicly disclosed. The school district has only stated that the district did not request her to go on leave. It has been reported that a conflict with a coworker may have contributed to Megan going on leave, but this has not been confirmed. According to Megan's older brother, Peter Naple, at the time Megan went on leave from work, she was going through an emotional upset and needed a break. At the recommendation of some friends, she checked into the Red Lion Inn in Stockbridge, Massachusetts on the first day of her leave to get away and relax. She planned to stay at the inn until March 30th. Megan's time away seemed to be good for her. She seemed to be in good spirits and enjoying a relaxing evening on March 26th when she and her brother were communicating via text message. She told him that she had spoken to some friends earlier in the day and that she was in her room at the inn enjoying a book and some soup. As of August of 2022, this remains the last time Peter has heard from his sister. Peter tried contacting Megan the following day, March 27th, but never received any response from her. He then called the inn and asked the staff there to check on her. When they went into her room, her bed was made, and many of her belongings were still there, but Megan was not. Still unable to contact his sister, Peter went to the police to report her missing on the morning of Tuesday, March 29th. That same day, a resident of Lee, Massachusetts reported a vehicle that appeared to have been abandoned in the parking lot near the trailhead at Janet Long Cope Park. He had driven past the parking lot on the morning of Sunday, March 27th, and it had been empty. When he drove past the parking lot again just before noon that same day on his way home, he noticed a car parked there. He took note of it because he wasn't sure why anyone would want to be out hiking that day as it was cold, windy, raining, and snowing. He drove past the parking lot again on Tuesday, and the same car was in the same spot, which made him think something was wrong and led to him notifying authorities. The car was Megan Marone's black 2017 Subaru Impreza, and it had been left unlocked. Hiking was a perfectly normal activity for Megan, who had gone on hikes with her brother since she was young. However, in addition to the day's weather, other circumstances led investigators to believe that Megan may have never made it onto the trail. According to Megan's brother, Megan might leave her car door unlocked while she went to scope out a hiking location, but she always made sure to lock her car before actually beginning a hike. In addition, a pair of boots had been left behind in the car. The trail near where the car was found was not a particularly well-known hiking spot, and other locations would have turned up first had Megan been researching places to hike. Her family believes it is possible she may have come to the park because the woman it was named in honor of was a cousin of the poet William Alexander Percy, which may have piqued Megan's interest and led to her wanting to visit the park. Cell phone records showed that Megan had not gone onto the trail, and 3 pings from the afternoon of 27th showed that she had instead been on private property across the street from the park. The remote residential area had dense vegetation and streams that ran through it. Police began in searches, canine units, helicopters, and drones in the effort, They later conducted a search along the Housatonic River corridor from Lee into Stockbridge and nearby Glendale using kayaks, side-scan sonar, and underwater cameras to search the river. When the police were not out looking for Megan, her family and the volunteers they organized were. Despite days full of searching, Megan was not located, and no clues relating to her disappearance were found. Megan's family has continued to actively look for her. They've established a 24-hour tip line as well as a website with information on her case. They are offering a $50,000 reward for information, leading directly to the safe return of Megan. 67-year-old Scott Graham lives in Victoria, British Columbia. In 2022, his love of travel took him to Europe. On June 29th, he flew to Amsterdam to meet up with some old friends before continuing to travel on to Spain and Portugal on his own. For the first several days of his trip, he was in daily contact with his family back in Canada, and everything seemed fine. Things started going wrong for Scott on July 11th. He was traveling by bus from Vigo to San Sebastian in Spain when his bus left him behind at a rest stop. His bag containing his cell phone, passport, and critical medication was still on the bus when it left without him. Scott had received a kidney transplant in 2014 and was dependent on daily anti-rejection medicine. It appears that Scott was never able to get his bag back. It is unclear if Scott was ever able to obtain more of his medication. He was able to make his way to San Sebastian by an unknown means of transportation, and he contacted his brother to tell him about the lost bag and his inability to get it back from the bus company via WhatsApp. Although again, it is unknown how he did so as he was without his phone. This is the last time he has been in contact with anyone in his family. On July 14th, he reported his bag missing to local police who advised him that he would need to go to the Canadian Embassy in Madrid to get a replacement passport. Scott was in Madrid the following day, July 15th. But before he made it to the embassy, he had to visit a local hospital after sustaining minor injuries to his head and hand in a fall. Hospital records contradict themselves, so he may have been given his anti-rejection medications or he may have just been issued a paper prescription for them. A record of him filling such a prescription has not been found. A nurse from the Royal Jubilee Hospital Kidney Clinic in Victoria has confirmed that a nurse from Spain contacted them sometime around 15th inquiring about Scott, his medications, and their dosages. Scott then went to the Canadian Embassy, where he applied for a new passport and paid the necessary fee. This trip to the embassy is the last place Scott has been seen. His family reported him missing the following day. Scott failed to come back to the embassy on July 18th for his appointment to pick up his new passport, and he missed his flight from Amsterdam back to Canada on July 29th. There has been no activity on his credit or debit cards. Scott's daughters have had a difficult time receiving support from the government in Canada and getting clear information from officials in Spain. Their efforts to locate their father have been hampered by bureaucratic and logistical constraints. Thanks to donations to a GoFundMe they set up, they were able to travel to Spain on August 10th to continue their search efforts there. Scott's family is concerned that the fall that brought him to the hospital on July 15th may have been the result of side effects of him being without his anti-rejection medication, which could have potentially been made worse by the extreme heat in Spain at the time. Scott has also previously suffered minor strokes, and if he has had another one and not received the necessary medical treatment, he may currently be cognitively impaired. Scott's daughters have not been able to find evidence confirming that their father is still in Madrid. They are therefore expanding their search into other European countries. Because Spain is part of the Schengen area, Scott could have crossed into the other member countries of the area even without his passport. Scott's missing person flyer has been translated into numerous languages and posted to a Facebook page, which will be linked in the description. Scott's family is hoping that individuals living in the countries where Scott could have traveled to will either share the post with the flyer written in their language or print the flyers and post them in their area. Kai Higby, who also goes by Kai, was born in Maui where his parents met. His mother is Hawaiian and his father is Caucasian and originally from California. Kai was 7 years old when his parents' marriage ended. And following the divorce, he, his twin brother, and younger sister moved to California with their father. He grew close with his father's side of the family over the following years, but ultimately decided to return to Hawaii as a teenager. he was able to still maintain a close relationship with his family in California. In 2003, when he was 22, Kai met the woman who would become his wife, Samantha, when he pointed out to her that she had dropped a $5 bill. Samantha was instantly smitten, drawn to Kai's laid-back and fun personality. The couple got married in 2005 and had 3 children. They settled in a small town on Maui, and Kai began working in landscaping, becoming popular with the owners of the properties where he worked. Kai is a dedicated father who loves spending time with his children. He regularly takes them out on outdoor excursions, including hunting, spearfishing, and hiking. While Kai has a loving family, not all of the aspects of his life are as ideal. Kai has a history of substance abuse. On May 6, 2022, he relapsed after months of being clean. His wife, Samantha, asked him to leave the home they share because she did not want their children to see him while he was under the influence. In previous instances when he was using, Kai would either go stay with his mother at her home in the Haina or in a nearby rental property while he sobered up. His mother would be the last person to see Kai before he went missing on May 7th. Around 11:30 that night, Kai hugged his mother, gave her his phone, and told her Happy Mother's Day, which was the following day. He has not been seen since. Kai was formally reported missing on May 12th, the day his white Toyota Tacoma was found abandoned in a parking garage on Front Street near the Lahaina Harbor. The truck was sighted at that location as early as May 8th. The vehicle was left unlocked, and Kai's wallet containing his driver's license, credit cards, and debit cards was left on the front seat. According to Samantha, Kai abandoning the truck was highly out of character as he is very proud of the vehicle because of how hard he worked to purchase it. Even more out of character was Kai's missing of his son's high school graduation on May 19th. Kai loved his son and had been looking forward to the event. Kai's family has become frustrated with how the Maui Police Department is handling the investigation into his disappearance. According to Samantha, the investigating officers made comments to her that she considers heartless, stating that her husband is probably off doing lots of drugs. Kai has had minor run-ins with law enforcement in the past, something his wife believes has led police to disregard his disappearance. Samantha acknowledges that her husband has made some poor choices in his life, but says that does not take away from the fact that he is a good person, and something has clearly happened to him. The family is still actively looking for Kai on their own, putting up flyers and trying to hire a private investigator. Kai's oldest son no longer sleeps in his bedroom, instead staying in the living room, waiting for his father to come home. 41-year-old Kai is 6 feet tall, has a number of traditional Hawaiian tattoos, and was last seen wearing a white shirt and dark-colored board shorts. Kai and his brother are identical twins who often get confused for one another, which could potentially complicate potential sightings of Kai. Before we continue, 90% of you haven't subscribed to our channel, so if you like this video, please subscribe. It motivates us to make more content for you. Okay, let's continue. Timothy Jones Jr. was born in 1981 to Timothy Jones Sr. and Cindy Jones, who was just 16 at the time of her pregnancy. Tragically, Cindy left when Jones Jr. was only 18 months old. Following her departure, Timothy Jones Sr. remarried. In 2001, Jones Jr. encountered legal issues when he was arrested in Illinois for cocaine possession, check forgery, and car theft. Although he was sentenced to 7 years in prison, he was released in 2003 after serving only 2 years. After this, his life seemed to take a turn for the better. He and Amber Kaiser had met as teenagers, and they got married in 2004. They soon had 3 children. Jones continued his education, eventually getting an engineering degree and graduating from Mississippi State University. The young family later moved to Blythewood seeking better opportunities of life. By 2014, they had 5 children who were 8-year-old Murrah Gracie, 7-year-old Elias, 6-year-old Nathan, 2-year-old Gabriel, and 1-year-old Abigail Elaine. As time went on, their marriage began to falter, and Jones' behavior changed drastically as he turned to drinking, smoking, and using synthetic marijuana. Amidst these challenges, Amber gave birth to their last child, Abigail Elaine. However, Jones had doubts about whether he was the father of the child due to this and other problems in their marriage. Jones and Amber got divorced in 2013. After the divorce, Jones won custody of the children. It was expected that Jones would be the model father and give his all to protect his children. But who could have predicted the horror that would come later? On Thursday, August 28, 2014, Jones picked up his 3 older children from school and the 2 youngest from their babysitter. He vanished the very next day. Jones and the children were gone for several days, prompting his family to reach out to the police, but only after they were unable to get in touch with him for several days. At 9:36 a.m. the next day, the babysitter, Elk, tried reaching him on the phone, but received no response. Unfazed, Elk decided to text Jones at 9:38, inquiring about dropping off the youngest children at daycare. Jones responded, "Don't worry about this morning. I'll see you next week." He assured her that the children would return on Tuesday, the day following Memorial Day. Meanwhile, Jones's grandmother, Roberta Thornsberry, desperately tried to reach him from Mississippi, but he declined her calls. On August 30th, Thornsberry grew increasingly concerned and sent a series of texts to Jones throughout the day, finally questioning him at 5:13 p.m. about his unresponsiveness. At 4:54 p.m., Elk gently reminded Jones to bring diapers when dropping off Gabriel and Abigail Elaine on September 1st. Later at 6:15 p.m., he made a call to Elk revealing his intentions to leave South Carolina with the children and start afresh. He asked Elk to clean up his mobile home and offered her whatever she wanted from the things he left behind. At 7 p.m., a call from Amber came in, but Jones didn't answer. His family reached out to the police as they couldn't reach him. A nationwide alert was released looking for Jones and indicated that he was missing and traveling with his 5 children. But it wouldn't be until September 6th that they received news on his whereabouts. On September 6th, 2014, a routine traffic safety stop in Smith County, Mississippi led to a shocking discovery. Tim Jones Jr. was detained at around 7 p.m. Under Sheriff Marty Patterson went to the scene around 8 p.m. He noticed that Jones showed signs of intoxication as he approached Jones's car. An Escalade emitted a foul stench. Bleached stains along the baseboard caught Patterson's attention. Running Jones' ID and license plate revealed an alarming hit from the FBI's National Crime Information Center, indicating that Jones was supposed to be traveling from Lexington with his 5 children. Patterson immediately contacted the Lexington County Sheriff's Department. When questioned about his children, Jones initially denied having any, but when pressed further, he claimed to have only 3 children in South Carolina. Smith County investigators promptly reached out to Jones's father, Tim Jones Sr., who then informed Jones's grandmother, Roberta Thornsberry, and Amber Jones's ex-wife. On September 8, 2014, investigative officers from the Lexington County Sheriff's Department and SLED arrived in Mississippi to delve into the case. 2 days later, on September 9th, Jones agreed to lead investigators to the bodies of his children. The discovery unfolded on September 10th when the bodies of Murad Gracie, Elias, Nathan, Gabriel, and Abigail Elaine were recovered. The evidence collected from Jones' Escalade on September 11th was disturbing and haunting. Among the items logged were family photos, clothing, drawings made by the children, letters to the children penned by their mother, Amber, Bibles, Tim Jones's diploma from Mississippi State University, and his passport. Equally chilling were handwritten notes by Timothy Jones containing lists of disturbing tasks such as melt bodies, sand bones to dust or small pieces, and burn up bodies. The list also included items needed for these horrifying acts such as camping supplies, gas, and acid. It seemed unbelievable that this father had meticulously planned to kill and dispose of the bodies of all 5 of his children. On September 13, 2014, Jones was booked into Kirkland Correctional Facility, where he was placed in solitary confinement away from the general population. But what had transpired on that fateful day? Why did Jones kill the children, and what prompted him to hide their bodies? Jones's confession and the police's investigation led them to the dark truth of what Jones did in the week when he disappeared with his children. The afternoon of Thursday, August 28, 2014 set the stage for the chilling chain of events. Tim Jones picked up his 3 older children from school and retrieved his 2 youngest from the babysitter. Little did anyone know that the seemingly ordinary day would take a nightmarish turn. Before 7 p.m., a storm of anger engulfed the family's mobile home. Jones confronted his 6-year-old son, Nathan, about damaged power outlets. He beat Nathan and subjected the child to a punishing physical ordeal. Jones went further to rain down a barrage of questions on the young child. At 7:10 p.m., there was a phone call from his estranged wife, Amber. Nathan, in fear and distress, revealed that the incident had been an accident, but Jones intervened, accusing Amber of protecting their son before abruptly ending the conversation. As the evening wore on, the darkness deepened. Nathan was sent to bed, and Amber's desperate attempts to reach out went unanswered. The details here were unclear, but around 8:30 p.m., Jones either discovered Nathan's lifeless body or attempted to ruse the boy to no avail. Jones faced the grim reality that his child was gone forever. Jones, seemingly triggered by his own imagination, would later claim to the authorities that Nathan was trying to harm him through the mobile home's electricity. This paranoia pushed him to kill his children. In the early hours of the following day, Jones took his 8-year-old daughter, Mura, to a convenience store to buy cigarettes. Upon returning home, a wave of violence consumed him. In his confession to the authorities, Jones admitted to choking Mura and Elias, aged 87, with his bare hands while using a belt to end the lives of Gabriel and Abigail Elaine. He then wrapped the bodies of his children in sheets and blankets from their beds before placing them in the back seat of his vehicle. The authorities also went through Jones' search history and revealed an unusual interest in herbal incense and Atlanta. It became apparent that Jones was on the hunt for spice, a synthetic marijuana that happened to be legal in South Carolina but banned in Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. Determined to get his hands on the substance, he scoured the internet for smoke shops or head shops across state borders. Around this time, he also declined calls from his grandmother, who he had made prior plans with. She had left up to 23 calls and texts. Tracking data suggested Jones's presence near Moody, Alabama at 2:20 p.m. In the late afternoon, between 3 and 5 p.m., Jones continued his search for smoke shops, this time focusing on Alabama and Mississippi. As the day progressed, Jones' location hopped from Lithium Springs, Georgia at 8:04 p.m. to Washington, Georgia at 10:29 p.m. It was clear that he was covering considerable ground. By August 30th, the location of Jones's phone indicated that he was in Red Bank. By August 31st, the search queries on Jones's phone revealed his plans to start anew. He looked up camping options in South Carolina, dumps in Lexington County, and animal services. On September 1st, a store receipt found in Jones's vehicle put him in Athens, Georgia. Surprisingly, data from his phone also indicated his presence in Spartansburg and Winsboro. At 1:20 a.m. that same day, the phone's location switched to Folly Beach. This situation took a darker turn on September 2nd at 10:35 a.m. when Jones conducted a series of concerning Google searches. He looked up body in landfill, muriatic acid burn, camping near Columbia, South Carolina. What does no extradition laws mean? And facing legal problems, where should you run? The phone was traced to West Columbia between 11 a.m. and noon. Jones and Elk exchanged texts about arrangements to clean his Red Bank mobile home. At 11:54 a.m., Jones' boss, Intel Jim McConnell, reached out to inquire about his absence from work. Additionally, there were unanswered calls from Sachs Gotha School regarding Mura, Elias, and Nathan around 1:30 p.m. The situation escalated as an unanswered call from McConnell followed at 1:53 p.m. The phone's location was further traced to Clinton, South Carolina at 3:22 p.m., Athens, Georgia at 4:19 p.m., and Lawrenceville, Georgia at 6:04 p.m. Throughout this tumultuous day, Jones ignored 2 calls from Amber at 6 p.m. and received an update call from Elk at 10:08 p.m. By September 3rd, the situation had grown concerning. Jones missed 2 calls in an unanswered text from Kevin McKinney, a coworker at Intel, at 10:07 a.m. Additionally, his boss call at 12:11 p.m. went unanswered too. Surveillance footage from various locations on September 3rd spotted Jones at the Augusta Road Walmart in Lexington, an Advanced Auto Store in Lake City, and a Dollar General in Orangeburg. Disturbingly, the Walmart footage showed him purchasing items like a saw blades, muriatic acid, garbage bags, a 5-gallon bucket, and goggles. On September 4th at 3:37 a.m., when the phone powered on again, Jones Googled missing children, Tim Jones, and the phone was traced to James Island near Charleston. Later that day, Thornsberry and Sachs got this text went unanswered, and Jones' phone was traced to Camden and then Orangeburg at 5:17 p.m. At 6:33 p.m., Jones was spotted using the Augusta Road ATM in Lexington, depositing a check for $3,518.49. This money revealed to be proceeds from Intel stock he sold weeks prior. The climax occurred on September 6th. Jones would reveal to the authorities that he placed the decomposing bodies of his children in black plastic garbage bags along a logging road between Greenville and Camden, Alabama. The bodies had been in the back seat of his vehicle since August 29, 2014. At 9:14 a.m., the phone was located in Greenville, Alabama. Receipts and surveillance video from the same day showed Jones at the Bypass Food Mart in Camden, Alabama at 1:06 p.m. It is unusual for a father to commit such an act. This made the authorities seek to understand what pushed him to kill the children. Hence, an investigation was launched to verify his mental state. In the wake of his incarceration, mental health professionals closely examined Tim Jones Jr.'s psychological state. Clinical and forensic psychiatrists and psychologists were involved in the evaluation, but there were disagreement among them regarding his diagnosis. While others suggested he may have a schizoaffective disorder or a personality disorder. Additionally, they debated whether his mental state during the crime could have been influenced by the use of synthetic marijuana, or if a traumatic brain injury he suffered at age 15 played a role in underlying psychosis. These varying theories were presented to the jury during the trial. To shed light on the roots of Tim Jones Jr.'s mental state, the history of the Jones family spanning 3 generations was diagrammed and explored. The aim was to understand how a turbulent environment and a familial background mental illness could have impacted Tim Jr.'s mental health. During the trial, the jury learned about the circumstances surrounding the conception and birth of Tim Jones Sr. Roberta Thornsberry, Tim Sr.'s mother, had been assaulted by her stepfather, leading to her pregnancy at just 12 years old. Surprisingly, Tim Jr.'s mother, Cynthia, also had a family history of mental illness. Tim Jr. was born when the young couple were barely out of their teens. However, their relationship turned volatile, leading to Cynthia's attempt to take Tim Jr. away from his father. Ultimately, Tim Sr. gained custody, and as a result, Tim Jr. was raised by his grandmother, Roberta Thornsberry. Meanwhile, Tim Sr. had Cynthia confined to a mental hospital in New York after she was diagnosed with schizophrenia. These intricate family dynamics were presented as evidence to help the jury comprehend the complex web of factors that may have contributed to Tim Jones Jr.'s mental state. Thornberry's marriage had its fair share of woes. Numerous incidences of the marriage involved calls to the police for shootings, stabbings, drug possession, and physical and alcohol abuse. The environment seemed anything but stable. As the years passed, Tim Sr. went through multiple marriages, divorcing Cynthia and marrying Carolyn, with whom he had 2 more sons. By the time Tim was 9, he found himself in a broken family. And as the years went on, he witnessed his father marrying again, this time to a woman called Julie when Jones was 16. Upon his release, Jones met Amber and the two got married. Jones had a strained relationship with his father. This escalated during the Christmas holidays of 2012, leading to 18 months of silence between them. The Christmas holiday of 2012 would be the last time that Jones's father would see the children. The trial commenced on May 15, 2019. Testimonies poured in from various individuals shedding light on the heinous crime committed by Jones. Law enforcement officials, mental health experts, correctional officers, teachers, school administrators, babysitters, and even Jones's own family members took the stand to present their accounts. From the onset, Jones's guilt was undeniable. He had confessed to the crime and the evidence against him was overwhelming. Despite this, the defense sought to establish that the man was severely mentally ill and thus not entirely responsible for his actions. However, when the jury delivered the guilty verdict, they unequivocally rejected the defense's argument. With guilt established, the focus shifted to determining the appropriate punishment for the murders. During the sentencing phase, the prosecution called on teachers and former babysitters to describe the trauma inflicted upon them by the loss of these innocent children, even though they were not biologically related. Their accounts painted a picture of the impact of Jones's actions on those left behind. The defense did not present experts to bolster their case, but they heavily relied on pleas for mercy from Jones's relatives who advocated for a life sentence instead of death. Amidst the emotionally charged courtroom, Jones's father and grandmother took to the stand, recounting a disturbed adolescence and adulthood of Jones. Their tearful testimonies, however, firmly opposed the idea of him facing the death penalty. On the following day, Amber Kaiser, the mother of the children and Jones' wife, returned to the stand for a second time in the trial. While her first appearance was marked by tears and visible distress, this time she mustered the strength to request mercy for Jones. Despite her own feelings of wanting to inflict harm on him, she acknowledged her children's sentiments and believed that they would not have wanted their father to die. She bravely expressed her willingness to accept whatever decision the jury would reach. Solicitor Rick Hubbard delivered the closing arguments for the state in the penalty phase of the Timothy Jones Jr. murder trial. Hubbard confronted the jury, posing a striking question: would you reserve death for the worst of the worst? Isn't he, pointing at Tim Jones, the worst of the worst? Tim Jones, a man who brutally murdered his 5 children. As Hubbard continued, he implored the jury to consider the kind of man Jones truly was, a murderer who callously betrayed the trust of his own flesh and blood, robbing them of their precious young lives. Reflecting on Jones's tumultuous childhood, Hubbard acknowledged that amidst the chaos his family had tried to shield him, recognizing something special in him. Jones's father, despite his own imperfections, had loved his son, and his grandmother had expressed her love for him too. Though also recognizing his selfish tendencies, Hubbard highlighted how Jones had learned to manipulate his family, knowing that they would always come to him and apologize, reinforcing a sense of entitlement. Hubbard showed 2 pictures. The first was one of Jones's joyful family, and the second was the children's lifeless bodies wrapped in black garbage bags. Hubbard drove home the point that Jones was responsible for destroying this loving family. He declared, "No father does this to his children." Hubbard highlighted that Jones's choices, not his family history, led to the tragic act of leaving his children's bodies exposed. With a display of crime scene and autopsy photos, Hubbard challenged the jury to confront the reality of Jones's actions. Throughout his closing arguments, Hubbard pressed the jury to contemplate whether a man who committed such an unfathomable act deserved mercy. With the weight of the evidence and the gravity of the crime before them, the jury was left to determine the fate of Jones. Jones' attorney, Casey Secker, passionately appealed to the jury's empathy for the Jones family. He prompted them to consider the family's ongoing suffering and heartache. Secker acknowledged the gravity of Jones's actions, urging a balanced decision that respected both severe punishment and compassion. It took the jury just over 6 hours to find Jones guilty. Despite the gravity of the situation, Jones chose not to testify in his defense during either the guilt or penalty phase. Instead, the courtroom was exposed to a haunting audio confession from 2014 that left no room for doubt. After just an hour and 45 minutes of intense deliberation, the 12-member panel delivered their verdict. The death penalty was not an automatic consequence in this case. The jurors carefully considered any extenuating circumstances before reaching their unanimous decision to condemn Jones to death. All 12 jurors had to be in agreement and signed a verdict form before the judge formally delivered the death sentence. As the Jones family solemnly exited the courthouse, they remained tight-lipped, offering no comment to the press, but this would not be the end of the case. In 2021, 2 years after receiving a death sentence, Jones sought a new trial and the removal of his death penalty, claiming that the exposure to distressing autopsy photos during the original trial prejudiced jurors against him. Lawyer Robert Dudek argued that Jones, who suffers from schizophrenia, was unfairly judged. The The defense contended that the inclusion of gruesome autopsy images skewed the sentencing against Jones, and that prosecutors misrepresented the consequences of an insanity plea. These images, taken 9 days after the children's deaths, raised concerns about fairness. The defense also objected to excluding expert witness testimony, challenging Jones's mental health and diagnosis. Solicitor Rick Hubbard defended his decision to include the photos, facing criticism from justices for potentially manipulating the jurors' emotions. The court usually permits strong defense arguments in death penalty cases, but concerns were raised about the trial's handling. However, in March 2023, the South Carolina Supreme Court rejected Jones's appeal. The court acknowledged that 2 errors were made during the trial, but deemed them harmless errors that didn't warrant overturning the conviction or sentence. The initial mistake was excluding Dr. Adriana Flores' testimony, meant to challenge another doctor's claims about Jones faking mental issues. The court said her input should have been allowed. The second error involved showing disturbing autopsy photos. Despite this, the court noted Jones tried to hide the crime, so the images didn't greatly affect the jurors' death penalty decision. The emotions within Jones' family must have been unimaginable. Losing all 5 children and facing the possibility of Jones's execution must be a heavy burden to bear. The prosecutors and defense attorneys tasked with debating through the horrors of the case are surely haunted by the disturbing images and Jones's own confession. And above all, the children's mother, who has endured indescribable pain since that fateful day on August 28, 2014. Would she be able to pick up the pieces and start again? In the summer of 2009, 28-year-old David Gimelfarb sought a break to unwind. He was pursuing a doctorate and about to start his 4th year of graduate studies at the Adler School of Professional Psychology in Chicago. Additionally, he volunteered as a counselor at a community health center on Chicago's West Side. Although David intended to make counseling his career, he found it to be a particularly stressful field. On top of this, David was dealing with the recent loss of his cherished grandmother, Valentina. Valentina had helped take care of David from the time he was an infant until he started kindergarten. One of David's mother's co-workers had suggested that David look into traveling to Costa Rica. It seemed like an ideal travel destination for David. He was fluent in Spanish and was an experienced hiker. The country was full of beautiful trails for him to explore. David decided that some time away in nature would do him good before he started school again, and he planned a trip to Costa Rica just a few days before he left on it. Solo travel was not out of character for David, who had gone on a similar hiking trip to Hawaii alone within the previous year. Solo travel and spending time alone in nature also fit in with David's personality, as he tended to be more introspective and reserved. These aspects of his personality may have been tied to events in his early childhood. When he started kindergarten, he struggled to speak in English with his classmates as he was used to speaking Russian with his parents and grandmother. David became slightly less reserved later in life when he began college at Beloit College and joined a fraternity. He had a wry sense of humor and a positive outlook on life and was skilled at writing out his thoughts about deep and philosophical topics. David began his 6-day trip to Costa Rica on August 9, 2009. David was his parents' only child and was in daily contact with them, whether he was at home in Illinois or traveling. He spoke to his mother, Luda, on August 10th from his room at the Hacienda Gacapelan in the Guanacaste province of northwest Costa Rica. David told her that the hotel was too far away from the beaches and most of the other area attractions he was interested in visiting, so he was considering moving to another hotel for part of his trip. He had met a girl at the beach and hoped to see her again. Luda wanted to know more about the girl, but David would only say that she seemed very nice. David told his mother that he would be spending the following day, August 11th, hiking in the nearby Rincon de la Vieja National Park. However, the following evening, he never called to tell her how his hike went, as she expected. By 10 p.m., she had grown concerned enough to try calling him, but he did not answer. She called the hotel's front desk the following morning, but they told her that he was not answering his room phone either. Luda insisted that hotel staff go into her son's room to see if he was all right. Several hours later, Luda received a phone call from the hotel's owner. It did not appear that David had slept in his room the previous night. His suitcase was still in the room, but the car he had rented had been located still in the parking lot of the national park where David had planned to go hiking the day before. Luda and her husband, Roma, immediately made plans to travel to Costa Rica to look for their son. By the time they arrived the following day, search efforts were already underway. Volunteers from the Red Cross were searching the national park on foot. Other hikers had gone missing in the park in the past, but all of them had eventually been found. Witnesses had seen David eating breakfast at his hotel on August 11th around 9 a.m., and he signed in at the national park shortly before 10 a.m. He told the park ranger on duty that he would be hiking along an easy and established loop that was not even 2 miles long but would take him past some of the thermal mud pots that were a famous feature of the park. Initial search efforts were therefore centered around this loop. However, when David was not located, search teams grew in size and rethought their strategy. Since David was an experienced hiker, they considered that he may have changed his mind and undertaken a more difficult hike. Had he done so, he potentially opted to hike up to the crater of the park's nearby volcano. This hike would take approximately 8 hours to complete round trip, and sundown had been at approximately 6 p.m. on August 11th, meaning that if David had started the hike after 10 a.m., he would have been caught in the dark and could have potentially run into trouble. The crater itself was searched from the air, but nothing was found there. The expanded search area did not turn up any signs of David. While David's parents worked to find him in Costa Rica, his other loved ones back in the United States were also contributing to the search effort. A Facebook group called Help Find David Gimelfarb was established, and more than 1,000 people joined it within just a few days. David's parents were not receiving support from the American Embassy in Costa Rica, so members of the group were encouraged to contact their elected representatives to ask for government support for the search. David's friends also staged demonstrations in Chicago's Daily Plaza and outside local television stations with signs describing why David was important to them in hopes of garnering media coverage and, in turn, government support for the search effort. Their actions did finally pay off on August 19th, when the embassy sent 2 military helicopters equipped with infrared sensors to search the dense vegetation of the national park from the air, along with a dozen soldiers from Sotacano Air Base in Honduras. When David was not located during the search, concerns that he may have fallen victim to something more sinister than a simple hiking accident arose. Robberies within the park were not unheard of, and sections of the park were closed down in 2009 and then later in 2012 due to visitors being robbed, reportedly by individuals wielding machetes. Because the park was close to the border with Nicaragua, some of its more remote trails were known to be used by drug smugglers and poachers to move product into the neighboring country, opening up the possibility that David may have witnessed something illegal while out hiking and was killed to prevent him from reporting what he had seen. Alternatively, David could have stumbled onto private property bordering the national park and been killed by a property owner who mistook David as a poacher or smuggler encroaching on their land. The proximity of the park to Nicaragua also raised the possibility for some people that David may have voluntarily disappeared and traveled there to start a new life, as the cost of living in Nicaragua is fairly low and immigration laws are not strictly enforced. However, circumstances, as well as David's behavior, do not support this theory. The night before he went missing, he had called a friend back in Chicago to confirm dinner plans they had for after he returned home. David was understandably sad about his grandmother's recent death, but he was not depressed or distressed at the time of his trip. According to messages David wrote and conversations he had shortly before he disappeared, his grandmother's death appears to have highlighted the finiteness of life for him. However, this seems to have inspired him not to despair or give up on his life, but rather to make the most out of the time he had. The items David left behind at his hotel also indicate that he was not planning on leaving for more than a day. Inside the safe in his room were his cell phone, his passport, and $600 in cash. David had traveled to Costa Rica with $800 in cash, and taking into account his expenses during his travels and at the beginning of his trip, it is estimated that he would have only had around $100 with him when he went missing. It is believed David only had his backpack, a copy of his passport, water, protein bars, his journal, an inexpensive camera, and his wallet, which contained his driver's license and a few credit cards, in addition to the presumed amount of cash with him when he began his hike. None of David's financial accounts have been accessed since he disappeared, and there is no evidence of him opening any new ones. When David's disappearance was not quickly resolved, His parents continued to visit Costa Rica year after year to continue looking for their son. Potential clues and sightings were reported to them in the following years. A stack of crayon-drawn artwork, which bore stylistic similarities to drawings David was known to create, was found in an abandoned house in Quipos, which led to the Gimelfarbs hoping that whoever drew them had come in contact with their son and could provide them with information if they could be located. There have been several potential sightings of David since he disappeared, but none of them have been confirmed to be David. A local farmer reported seeing a disheveled hiker who ran away and into the woods when he approached him. In February of 2010, a disheveled man matching David's general description wandered into a Coast Guard station. The man appeared confused and disoriented. Law enforcement contacted David's parents, but by the time they reached them, the man had left the station. The authorities had no legal reason to detain him. In October of 2012, an unkempt and confused man stumbled into a mini-mart in the coastal town of Limon, more than 200 miles away from the national park David visited on the day of his disappearance. The man could not talk but gestured that he needed something to drink. A family there had seen a television report about David's disappearance and believed this man was him, so they took him to the local police station. The police met with the man, but soon let him go without even taking a photograph of him, so there is no evidence besides the family's belief that the man was David. In 2013, while David's parents were in Costa Rica searching for David, they received calls and emails from someone telling them that David was being held hostage and would only be released if they paid $250,000 in ransom. They were sent a photo which was supposed to be of David, but it was too dark to tell if it was actually their son. Police ultimately determined the extortion to be a hoax, as the calls the Gimelfarbs received were found to have been made from inside of a prison. In 2018, a woman called in a tip that David may have received treatment at the National Psychiatric Hospital, but an investigator who visited the facility found no sign of anyone matching David's description. David's parents hired for private investigators to work on their son's case, both in Costa Rica and from the United States. On November 6, 2009, Costa Rica's Organismo de Investigación Judicial formally closed their investigation into David's disappearance despite the lack of resolution to it. As of 2018, David's case had been transferred to the agency's Department of Criminal Investigations based out of their office in San Jose. David's parents, Roma and Luda, continued to make yearly trips to Costa Rica around the anniversary of David's disappearance to ensure David's case continues to be covered in the local media, follow up on tips, and meet with officials from the American Embassy and the OIJ about their son's case. They continued to believe that their son was still alive. In a 2018 interview, they vowed to continue making these annual trips until they were too old to travel. Unfortunately, Roma Gimelfarb did not live to go on the next year's trip, passing away in March of 2019. He had spent 4 years battling cancer, but had not let it interfere with his travels to Costa Rica and his search for his son. Luda Gimelfarb remains active in and dedicated to the search for David. A $100,000 reward is being offered for information that reveals David's whereabouts. Let's rewind the clock to February 6, 1960, the day a sweet little girl came into the world. Born to Edward and Norma Hutto in the charming town of Largo, Florida, she was named Carol Dean Hutto. As the youngest of the family, Carol was showered with affection and attention from everyone. Growing up, she attended Largo High School, where her kind and gentle nature made her a cherished figure among her peers. Carol's family was quite a crew. She had a half-brother, Jerry Irwin Hutto, and while details about him are limited, it's clear that Carol and Jerry shared a special and close bond. Jerry was devoted to his sister, always striving to fulfill her wishes and demonstrating their strong sibling connection. Carol also had 2 sisters, Pamela Beale Hutto and Melinda Darlene Hutto, and 2 other brothers, Maurice Barnett Hutto and Frank Hutto. Carol was a source of joy to her family, particularly to her mother. They enjoyed doing activities like going to thrilling NASCAR races and exciting wrestling matches. Her mom fondly remembers her as a devoted Christian who chose her friends carefully. Carol had big dreams and a heart full of adventure, but sadly, she didn't get the chance to fully experience them and live those dreams. On December 13, 1976, Carol Hutto was spending time at her home on Corvette Drive with her mother Norma and her half-brother, 17 years old Jerry Irwin. Everything seemed like a usual evening. They were all enjoying themselves, sharing jokes and laughter. Norma was busy preparing dinner for the family, and Jerry was getting ready for a date. Their evening took an unexpected turn when the phone in the house started ringing. Norma went to pick up the call, and it turned out to be Carol's friend on the line, so she handed the phone to Carol and they spent a few minutes whispering to each other, but when Norma came back, she quickly ended the call. Strangely, after the call, Carol's mood took a sudden turn. She became incredibly happy and excited, which caught Norma's attention. Carol hurriedly went to her room, fixed her hair, and checked her appearance in the mirror. After about 15 minutes, she told her mom that she was heading to a store nearby, which was just a 10-minute walk away from their house. Even before Norma could ask what she needed from the store, Carol was already at the door. However, before leaving, Carol made a promise that she would be back soon. Later, Carol's half-brother Jerry also left the house for his date and said goodbye to Norma. And it usually took about 20 minutes or even less for Carol to walk there and back. So Norma expected Carol to return home in a half an hour. But after 1 hour had passed and Carol still hadn't come back, Norma started to wonder if Carol had bumped into her friends on the way and was chatting with them, which might be why she was taking longer. But after 2 hours had passed and Carol hadn't come back, Norma became even more anxious. It was getting dark outside, and Carol's absence was concerning because she had never missed her curfew before. At around 10 p.m., when Jerry arrived home, Norma, deeply concerned, asked if she had seen Carol. However, Jerry was clueless about her whereabouts, just like Norma. Upon learning that Carol hadn't returned home since she left, Jerry became even more worried. Norma urged him to go out and search for her. He started combing the streets, calling out her name, but didn't receive any responses. He even went to the store near their house, where Carol was supposed to go. But the store staff mentioned that they hadn't seen her today, which led to the concerning questions of where Carol might be if she didn't go to the store as planned. Jerry sadly returned home and shared the unfortunate news with Norma that he couldn't find Carol anywhere. Despite their concern, they decided to wait until morning, hoping Carol might come back home on her own. However, as the morning sunlight arrived, Norma became even more anxious because there was still no sign of Carol. Without delaying any further, Norma decided to call the police to report Carol as missing. However, the police informed her that since less than 24 hours had passed since Carol went missing, they couldn't file a missing person report. At this point, they also considered the possibility that Carol might have run away from home. But Norma wasn't ready to accept that Carol would ever leave her home on her own or run away from her family. She had a strong feeling that something bad had happened to her daughter. Because of this, Norma and Jerry didn't want to sit and wait for the police to do something about it. They decided to take matters in their own hands and actively search for Carol themselves. They went around their neighborhood, talking to neighbors to see if anyone had seen Carol the previous night. Most of the neighbors remembered seeing Carol around 8 p.m. when she left home, but no one had spotted her coming back home that night. Norma and Jerry also visited all of Carol's friends' houses to find out if she had spoken to anyone or gone to their homes, but they couldn't find any trace of her. The sudden disappearance of Carol deeply affected Norma, and the entire community also came together after the news that their little Carol was missing to help in any way they could. At the same time, the police were also actively searching for Carol. They checked various stores, both nearby Carol's house and more distant, to see if she had visited any of them that night. Unfortunately, no one could confirm seeing her at any of those locations. The police noticed that there was a security camera outside the store that Carol was supposed to go. However, upon reviewing the footage, they couldn't find any evidence of Carol visiting the store on the night she disappeared. Back in those days, security cameras were not as common as it is today, so only a few stores had installed them, making it challenging to track Carol's movements. But it didn't take long for a tragic discovery to occur. On the evening of December 14, 1976, Carol's half-brother Jerry stumbled upon her lifeless body under unusual circumstances. He had been searching the neighborhood on his own, desperately trying to find Carol. His search led him to the end of the street near a building that was still under construction. This building was located at 418 Imperial Drive, close to a lake. It was there that Jerry claimed to have discovered Carol's body. The details surrounding how he came across her in this specific spot remain a mystery. Carol's lifeless body was found floating in the water, her clothes partially removed. This sight was shocking and deeply disturbing for Jerry. He immediately contacted the Largo police to report the discovery, and then had the difficult task of returning home to inform Norma about the heartbreaking news. When the police arrived, they carefully retrieved Carol's body from the lake to preserve any potential evidence. It became evident quite quickly that Carol's death wasn't accidental. The presence of injuries on her body and a concrete block used to submerge her indicated foul play, suggesting that someone intentionally killed her and attempted to hide her body. The police believed that the attack likely occurred at the under-construction house, and then her body was placed in the lake. A crucial clue was Carol's watch, which was stopped at 10:36 p.m., indicating the time of her murder was likely between 10:30 and 10:45 p.m. After Carol's lifeless body was sent for a thorough autopsy, some unsettling facts came to light. The coroner found that Carol had been strangled, which likely made her lose consciousness but didn't kill her right away. Additionally, she had suffered from a blow to the head with a heavy object, resulting in a severe injury. Adding to the distressing findings, Carol also had a significant burn on her thigh. The medical examiner's report uncovered an even more horrifying detail. When Carol was thrown into the water and a heavy concrete block was placed over her body, she was still alive. Despite the harrowing circumstances, she remained conscious and tragically succumbed to drowning over time. During the examination of Carol's body, the coroner also discovered 3 long hairs that were of the same person but seemed to belong to someone other than her. Additionally, a 4th hair, unidentified and possibly belonging to the killer, was found on Carol's blue jeans. This discovery held the potential to be a crucial breakthrough in the case. However, the limitations of medical technology in the 1970s meant that not much could be done with the hairs at that time. So they were carefully stored away, awaiting the development of more advanced techniques that could help identify the person responsible for Carol's tragic fate. For a little while, the Largo police had their eyes on Jerry Irwin, Carol's half-brother, because he was also outside on the night Carol was killed. Even though Jerry said he was on a date, the police discovered he got done half an hour earlier than he claimed. This made them wonder what was he doing during that time gap. The restaurant he went to was only about 8 minutes away from home, so why didn't he return home soon? The police started thinking that Jerry might be involved in Carol's death, since he couldn't provide an alibi for that time gap. They concentrated their investigation on him, but it didn't lead to any solid evidence. They couldn't find any proof that Jerry could have hurt Carol. Norma, Carol's mother, was convinced that Jerry cared deeply for his sister that would never hurt her. Despite their initial suspicion, the focus on Jerry didn't bring them any closer to the truth. The police cleared Jerry of suspicion as they couldn't find any more evidence against him. For the next 18 months, the police put a lot of effort into exploring every lead. But unfortunately, they couldn't find any clues to solve the case, and the investigation only went in circles. As time went on, the investigation began to lose momentum and the case grew cold. This left the Hutto family with aching questions. What really happened to Carol on that fateful night? Who was responsible for her death? They not only suffered the loss of their beloved daughter, but also the frustration of not finding justice for her. For almost 20 years, the mystery of Carol's murder remained unsolved. But in March 1994, a twist of fate brought a fresh set of eyes to the case. Officer Brad Hoyes, sidelined by a work injury, found himself poring over cold case files during his desk duty. As he sifted through the forgotten files, he stumbled upon the haunting details of Carol Hutto's murder case, reigniting a dormant investigation. As Officer Brad delved into the case, he sensed that there were hidden layers that hadn't received thorough scrutiny during the original 1976 investigation. Driven by his intuition, he made the bold decision to reopen the case and retrieve the evidence box that had been stowed away for years. Among the contents, he stumbled across Carol's personal diary. Officer Brad saw potential in those pages, hoping the diary might hold the missing pieces needed to unravel the mystery of Carol's tragic end. A few pages into the diary, Carol wrote about her secret romance with her classmate. It was back in 1976 when Carol was 16 years old. She had a major crush on a 17-year-old boy, James Brian Kuhn, born July 20th, 1959, also known as Jimmy Kuhn. They both were juniors at Largo High School and used to talk to each other all the time at school. The whispers of their closeness spread among the school corridors, but they chose to play it cool and never openly acknowledged their relationship. It was Kuhn who asked Carol to keep the relationship a secret, as his family was really strict, so they decided to hide it from everyone. At one point, Carol also claimed that she was so in love with Kuhn. Kuhn was also among the attendees at Carol's funeral, who appeared genuinely sorrowful and far from a suspect. In 1976, during the initial investigation, Kuhn was also questioned as a friend of Carol, and he claimed he hadn't seen or spoken to her on the night of the murder, asserting that he was at home the entire time. However, in 1994, when cold case detectives revisited the case, they spotted a discrepancy between Kuhn's statements and what the Hutto family had originally told the police. They revealed that on the fateful night of December 13, 1976, Carol had received a phone call from none other than Jimmy Kuhn. By this time, Kuhn was 34 years old and had become a father to a daughter. Following his graduation, he pursued a path in the U.S. Navy where he achieved significant success. His military career was marked by his role as a submariner stationed at the U.S. Naval Submarine Base in Connecticut. Age 43 had a personal connection to the case. He too had attended the same Largo High School as Kuhn and Carol, so when he got to know about the case, he took the lead in investigating Carol's murder. Working alongside him was Lieutenant John Carroll, who is currently Largo's deputy chief. In a bold move, they made an unexpected trip to Connecticut, where Kuhn, an 11-year military veteran, was stationed. During this encounter, Kuhn's story drastically changed. He contradicted his earlier statements and confessed that he had indeed seen Carol on the night of her disappearance. He barely remembered anything, Sergeant Mike Short recalled. According to Mike, Kuhn explained, "I put up walls. If I remember, I'm going to jail." These words left a strong impression on Mike, leading him to believe that he had identified Carol's killer. However, the following day, Kuhn changed his stance. He sought legal advice, refused further interviews, and declined to take a polygraph test. The police and prosecutors faced a challenge as they lacked enough evidence to definitively prove that Kuhn was the one who had killed Carol on the night of December 13, 1976. Convicting him of first-degree murder seemed unlikely. Due to the statute of limitations, anything less than first degree might result in Kuhn going free. The evidence box held an even more intriguing discovery. Among the items in the box, Detective Mike came across a collection of unfamiliar hairs, retrieved from both Carol's body and the crime scene, and these hairs had been diligently preserved. During the late 1980s, a pivotal moment in forensic science emerged, which was the utilization of DNA testing to establish whether someone was guilty or innocent in criminal investigations. As the 1990s progressed, the approach shifted towards examining mitochondrial DNA, which resides in small structures within human cells and is more likely to endure the test of time. Given these advancements, Mike was eager to conduct a genetic test on the hairs to potentially unveil the true identity of the perpetrator. However, there was a problem. They didn't have a sample of Kuhn's DNA, which was a crucial element for the testing. To obtain this vital piece of evidence, the detectives needed to obtain Kuhn's blood through a legal search warrant. With this plan in mind, they aimed to maximize the time spent with the suspect and decided to proceed strategically. In 1998, Detective Mike decided to bring in the reinforcements in the form of the Naval Criminal Investigation Service, or NCIS. They thought the presence of naval officials might make Kuhn nervous and lead him to a confession. On July 15, 1998, Detective Mike waited outside the police interrogation room, while Navy investigators Tom Asimos and Dave Early sat down with their murder suspect, James Kuhn. After obtaining the necessary warrant, they first collected a blood sample from Kuhn for further testing. Then Asimos and Early began their conversation with Kuhn, aiming to make him feel supported and comfortable. Their goal was to build trust, so that he might open up and gradually reveal the truth. At this moment, the NCIS agents were confident that Kuhn was on the verge of disclosing what happened on the night of December 13, 1976. Surprisingly, without any solid proof, they managed to make Kuhn break down as he wiped away his tears and finally revealed the heartbreaking truth about how he killed his girlfriend, Carol Hutto. Although Kuhn appeared emotional, the experienced cold case detectives weren't convinced of his honesty. The injuries Carol sustained, particularly to her neck and head, didn't align with a simple accident like tripping and falling. Instead, the nature of these injuries indicated blunt force trauma and strangulation. However, Kuhn had confessed to causing Carol's death. Although he claimed it was an accident, he took the responsibility for her demise, explaining that he failed to help her and attempted to conceal both the evidence and her body. As a result, Kuhn was taken into custody and anticipated his trial. However, on the eve of his trial, he presented a new version of events. In his alternative version of events, Kuhn initially claimed that there were no physical interactions between him and Carol, even though he wanted it. However, things took a different turn when Carol disagreed. Their disagreement escalated into a physical confrontation. Carol started screaming and fighting back by scratching and hitting him. Fearing her screams would draw attention, Kuhn struck her with a 2x4 piece of wood and even tightened his grip around her throat. When he finally let go, Carol fell to the floor, unconscious. Kuhn was panicked and unsure, so he made a hasty decision to hide her body. He also tried to create confusion by burning her thigh, hoping it would appear as though someone else had attacked her. Regardless of the details in Kuhn's different versions of events, detectives arrived at the same conclusion, that Carol had been assaulted, taken to the lake, and thrown face down. Her body was weighed down with a concrete block to keep it submerged. Interestingly, the second story Kuhn shared appeared more plausible and aligned better with the evidence discovered. This version of events seemed to match the physical evidence and circumstances surrounding Carol's tragic fate. As the trial day arrived on February 9, 2000, the prosecutors aimed for a first-degree murder conviction against Kuhn. His lawyers acknowledged that he had some involvement in the crime, but they argued that a more fitting verdict could be manslaughter or even third-degree murder. When the jury received the case, they took just 22 minutes to deliberate before reaching a verdict. Kuhn was found guilty of first-degree murder. There's a chance that Kuhn could experience freedom once more. Due to the fact that the crime occurred in 1976, Pinellas Pasco Circuit Court Judge Philip Federico applied the state laws from that year. These laws allow someone convicted of first-degree murder to be considered for parole after 25 years. Interestingly, Kuhn chose not to address the court during the sentencing. Carol's mother felt the need to address Kuhn. She expressed how Carol had trusted him and called him out, saying, "James Kuhn, you took the trust Carol gave you, and you used it for your depraved wants." Norma's words did not stop there. She pointed out that Kuhn had attended Carol's funeral, pretending to be upset and acting like her friend while hiding his true intentions. Norma hoped that he would never leave prison and didn't deserve a chance to start anew, emphasizing that he had taken that chance away from her daughter. Norma, a mother with high hopes for her young daughter Carol, had envisioned a bright future. She eagerly anticipated the day when Carol would proudly graduate from Largo High School. She had dreams of seeing her 16-year-old wearing a stunning white dress, walking down the aisle to embark on a joyful journey with her husband, and maybe even starting a family. However, all those dreams were shattered in a single night, and strongly desired that Kuhn would remain in prison forever, never to be released. So let's talk about Kuhn's case. What are your thoughts on whether he deserved a life sentence or not? And do you think he was really sorry about what he did? And do you believe Kuhn's actions towards Carol were accidental, or was it all planned out? Brenda Joyce Holland was born on July 8, 1947, as the second of Geraldine and Charles "Shotgun" Holland's 4 children. Raised in the mountains of western North Carolina, Brenda's family had deep roots in the area. The Hollands resided in Canton, a town whose economy was closely tied to the local paper mill where Brenda's father worked as a floor manager. Her parents felt secure in their community and hoped their children would stay within the safe confines of their mountain home. Although Brenda's ambitions led her away from Canton, she remained conscious of her parents' feelings and sought their approval as she pursued her goals. While some of her decisions might have seemed bold to her parents, Brenda took their concerns into account when planning her future. She was the first in her family to attend college, encouraged by her family physician, Dr. Matthews, to enroll at Campbell College. Although the small Baptist institution was located in North Carolina, it was nearly 300 miles away in Buys Creek. Brenda's father was not opposed to his daughter receiving a college education, but her mother was worried about paying for college and about her daughter being so far away from home. With the help of Dr. Matthews, Brenda was able to work out the logistical concerns of going away to school and got her mother to agree to letting her attend. Brenda eventually wanted to move off of campus and into a boarding house run by a local widow, but knew this would be pushing her parents' limits. She ultimately secured their permission by taking care of the necessary preparations and by appealing to the amount of money the move would save each month. Brenda became very active with the drama program at the school and soon got a paid position as a costumer for the Campbell players. She was successful in this position due to both her creativity and her hardworking nature. She considered staying on campus during a semester break to do more for the department because she was concerned that completing her assigned tasks alone did not merit the paycheck she received. Brenda dreamed of having a career in theater and considered moving to New York City to work odd jobs while making connections with the Broadway community. However, she knew that her parents would never approve of such a plan and, therefore, made slightly more local arrangements for her employment over the summer of 1967 following her sophomore year of college. Brenda had been hired to be the makeup supervisor for The Lost Colony, an outdoor symphonic drama that had been staged in the town of Manio in North Carolina's Outer Banks since 1937. While a local production may not seem comparable to a Broadway play, working on The Lost Colony was a major opportunity for Brenda. The play, which details the history and mystery of the Roanoke colony and the unexplained disappearance of more than 100 of its settlers, continues to be a major and respected production to this day. During the 1966 season, the year before Brenda was hired to work on the play, more than 145,000 tickets had been sold for the outdoor performance throughout its summer run. As of 2022, more than 4 million people have seen the production, and it received an honorary Tony Award in 2013. Working on The Lost Colony would allow Brenda to work with multiple individuals in the theater community with experience within and outside of North Carolina. Her position as the makeup supervisor gave her the chance to work under famed costumer Irene Smartrains, famous for her work as the costume director for the Carolina Playmakers at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Joe Layton, who directed and choreographed The Lost Colony for the 1967 season, had extensive credits working on Broadway and in television. One of the most popular television stars of the time also had ties to The Lost Colony and to Manio. Andy Griffith, who, in 1967, was near the end of the 8th-season run of his successful eponymous television show, owned a home in Manio and spent time there when he wasn't filming. His love of the town stemmed from his time there working on The Lost Colony. One of his earliest stage roles had been as a soldier in the play, and he would return for several more seasons, eventually playing the role of Sir Walter Raleigh. As good of an opportunity, working on The Lost Colony would be for Brenda. Her parents did not want her moving even farther away from their home for the summer. They instead wanted her to come home to Kenton and go back to her job at a local drive-in, arguing that she would make more than the $45 a week she would earn working on the play by doing so. They eventually relented and signed off on her employment contract for the summer, as was required at the time. Brenda's parents were frustrated to learn that their daughter ultimately would be unable to come home to see them at the end of her spring semester before heading to the coast to start work on the play. The last time they had seen her was at the end of March for Easter. This meant they had not seen Brenda since she had decided to dramatically change her hair on May 12th, dyeing it blonde and cutting it into a stylish bob. On May 31st, 1967, Brenda caught a ride from Buys Creek to Manio from a fellow Campbell student who had occasionally taken Brenda out on dates and was a native of Manio. For the summer, Brenda would share an efficiency apartment on the upper level of a local family's home with another student working on The Lost Colony for the season. Brenda's dedication to her job quickly earned her the respect of those she worked with, and she built up a social life in Manio based largely around the play. She quickly began integrating into the Lost Colony community and the coastal community of Manio. While Brenda may not have been living a conservative lifestyle by her parents' standards, She was social and curious rather than wild and rebellious. She mainly attended parties, not to drink or cause trouble, but for the opportunity to speak to a variety of people, sometimes ending the night still holding the same beer she had started the night with. She went out on casual dates with a few men in the weeks following her arrival in Mano, with her supervisor from the play keeping a watchful eye on her and giving her advice on how to avoid being taken advantage of. Unable to spend time with her younger brother and sister as she was accustomed to, Brenda got to know the younger members of the cast and crew, including a 13-year-old boy who sold seat cushions at the theater. He had suffered from rheumatoid arthritis and had never learned to swim, so Brenda taught him how to at Nags Head Beach and reassured him when he struggled. Brenda kept in touch with her parents by regularly sending them letters. At the performance of The Lost Colony on July 1st, 1967, everything seemed perfectly normal to the audience, but backstage, the cast and crew was growing concerned. Brenda Holland had not shown up for work. While an unexplained absence may not have been cause for alarm when it came to some members of the crew, when it was Brenda involved, it was. While she had only been working on the play for a month, she had never missed a shift. Furthermore, Cora Twyford, who performed as a colonist in the play and was Brenda's landlady, reported that Brenda had not come home the night before. While it was common for some of her boarders to stay out all night, like Brenda's roommate who had not arrived home until 7 a.m. that morning, it was unheard of for Brenda to do so. Brenda had left after the previous night's performance with Danny Barber, a chorus singer in the play, to go out on a date. At intermission, Cora Twyford and the play's general manager asked Danny when he had last seen Brenda. At first, he stated that he had dropped her off in front of the house where she was staying. When Cora told him, she knew that this wasn't true because Brenda had never come home. He admitted that he and Brenda had gone back to his house after their date. They had been talking and reading magazines in his room, and he fell asleep. When he woke up that morning, Brenda was gone, and he assumed that at some point after he fell asleep, she had walked the few blocks back to where she was staying on her own. The general manager called the sheriff's office to report Brenda missing at 9:20 p.m. and drove over programs for the play, which contained a photo of Brenda, to the office after the conclusion of the night's performance. After a sleepless night, he called the sheriff's office again at 6 o'clock the following morning to reiterate his concerns and try to get the investigation pushed forward, even though it was a Sunday. The sheriff's investigation began that morning, and alerts about Brenda's disappearance went out throughout the state. However, notifying Brenda's family that she was missing proved difficult as no one was answering the phone at the family home. Brenda's older sister, and learned that her sister was missing through a radio broadcast she heard over the AM radio in her car on her way home from church Sunday evening, and knew why her family had not answered their phone and why no one in Canton was able to find them. The family had gone to stay at a remote trailer they owned near Lake Glenville, an hour west of Canton. The trailer had no phone, so once and notified the Hayward County Sheriff's Office of their location, a deputy was sent out to notify Brenda's parents of her disappearance. The Holland family had gone to bed early that night, so they were all asleep when the deputy arrived. After learning their daughter was missing, Brenda's parents quickly packed up and left for Canton so that they could drop off their two youngest children with their oldest daughter and her family before continuing on to Mano to help look for Brenda. On Monday morning, approximately 75 volunteers joined sheriff's deputies in a search for Brenda. Most of the volunteers were cast or crew members from the Lost Colony. The scale of the search increased over the following few days. Helicopters from the Coast Guard searched from the air, and soldiers from the Marines joined the effort. The search parties grew as Brenda's family members and fellow students at Campbell College arrived to help. On July 6th at 10:15 in the morning, a pilot with the Civil Air Patrol spotted something in the Albemarle Sound off the coast of a small fishing village northwest of Mano. When he circled back at a lower altitude to look again, he realized that the object in the water below was, in fact, a human body. He radioed in what he had found and circled the area so as to not lose sight of it until law enforcement arrived. The body was pulled from the water and confirmed to be Brenda Holland. Brenda's body was driven to Norfolk, Virginia, so that her autopsy could be performed at the office of the Virginia State Medical Examiner. North Carolina did not have a statewide medical examiner's office at the time, and the facility in Virginia was the closest one with the best equipment and experienced pathologists. Brenda had wounds around her neck, and the pathologist found that she had died as the result of ligature strangulation. He also found signs that Brenda had been raped. Whether or not rape was the motive for Brenda's murder is not entirely certain. Investigators were initially confused as to why her killer would redress her so exactly after raping her. When her body was found, she was still wearing her underwear, a bodysuit, and a tight skirt, still completely buttoned up. Furthermore, witness accounts of statements made by Brenda indicate that the injuries that pointed to her being raped may have been inflicted in a separate incident. Days before her death, Brenda had confided in her supervisor, Irene Raines, that she had a bad experience while on a date with a local man she had been seeing. Brenda stated, "I'm no good," and said that she would no longer be seeing the man. She further confided in Danny Barber, her date on her last evening alive, about the incident. During an interview with authorities, he stated that Brenda had told him about this man and his mistreatment of her. He said she told him about him going to bed with her, about the rough treatment. It was very repulsive and it had changed her outlook on life. If Brenda had been raped by this man while on a date earlier on in the week, these injuries found on her body may not have been connected to her murder, but rather to the earlier assault, leaving the question of whether or not she had been raped just prior to her murder open. Brenda's body was taken back to Canton for her funeral and burial. Her parents received mourners at a local funeral home on the evening of July 8th, the day that should have been Brenda's 20th birthday. Her funeral was held the following afternoon at her family church, and she was buried in a lot in the cemetery her parents had purchased just a few years earlier with the belief that their children would be burying them there first. Some of the friends Brenda had made during her time in Mano while working on the Lost Colony traveled to Canton for her funeral. 100 other members of the cast and crew attended a memorial service held for her back in Mano, which was held at the same time as the service in Canton. Dare County Sheriff Frank Calhoun quickly zeroed in on Brenda's last date, Danny Barber, as his main suspect, and Danny was one of the first people he contacted when Brenda went missing. 24-year-old Danny had served 3 years in the Army, where he had been a member of the U.S. Army Band and was a student at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. 1967 was his third season as a singer in the Lost Colony. According to Danny, after the performance on June 30th, he and Brenda had gone to a bar where they each had one beer and then to Jeanette's Pier to watch people who were shark fishing. They returned to the home he was sharing with 2 housemates just after 2 a.m. and went up to Danny's bedroom because they did not want to make noise in the living room and disturb one of Danny's housemates, who they knew was home. Danny and Brenda then talked for a while and kissed but did not have sex. They then passed a magazine back and forth reading articles to each other. At some point, Danny fell asleep and woke up hours later to find Brenda gone. He assumed she had just walked home rather than wake him up to get a ride. When first asked about when he last saw Brenda by the play's general manager on July 1st, Danny at first lied and said he had dropped her off at the home where she was staying around 2 a.m. when he had in fact taken her to his place at that time and had never taken her home. This initial falsehood made him look suspicious, although it may have been the product of Danny's more conservative nature rather than him having something to hide. Danny would later tell the play's general manager that he was afraid of Brenda's boss, Irene Raines. Irene was very concerned about the young people who worked under her, and if she had thought that the interactions between crew members was inappropriate, she would not hesitate to confront them about it. Danny, unaware of the seriousness of the situation at the time of the questioning, may not have wanted Irene to find out that he had been alone in his bedroom with Brenda. Furthermore, Danny's failure to take Brenda home seems to have violated his own understanding of gentlemanly conduct. According to Cora Twyford's daughter Penny, Danny came to their house to apologize to her mother for failing to see Brenda safely back to the room Cora was renting out to her. He appeared to have recognized that he made a mistake and was upset over it. Regardless of the reason for this initial lie, Danny was still the last known person to have seen Brenda, and he admitted to being alone with her in his bedroom. It was not inconceivable to the sheriff that he may have wanted more from Brenda sexually and killed her when she did not consent. However, Danny's version of events did appear to be supported by a statement from his housemate who had been in his that night. He heard Danny and a girl go up to Danny's room and was woken up later that night by the sound of the front door opening and someone quietly exiting the house. He did not, however, hear any signs of a struggle inside the house or the sound of a car starting up after the door to the house was opened. If Danny had killed Brenda in his room, he would have needed to get her downstairs and transport her by car to the water to dispose of her body, which would have created a lot of noise. What the housemaid heard sounds more in line with Brenda waking up and deciding to walk home rather than waking up Danny to drive her. While Brenda's parents were in town when her body was found and could have identified it in a more clinical setting, Sheriff Calhoun apparently hoped to rattle his prime suspect with the sight of Brenda's badly decomposed body. Danny Barber was therefore brought in to identify Brenda's body as it lay in a hearse near where it was found. Danny had to step away for a moment after seeing her, but then confirmed that it was Brenda. He based his identification off of a necklace Brenda always wore, which she had been given for winning Miss Congeniality in the Miss Hayward County Beauty Pageant the year before. Danny came in for multiple, often hours-long interviews, including one that kept him from attending Brenda's memorial service in the days after her body was found. Danny would later state that nothing he told the officers seemed to convince them that he hadn't killed Brenda. His brother eventually convinced him to hire a lawyer who placed limits on law enforcement's access to Danny. Authorities remained focused on Danny in their investigation and continued to put pressure on him. An agent from the State Bureau of Investigation was in the audience of every performance of The Lost Colony Danny sang in for the rest of the summer. Agents from the SBI interviewed Danny twice in Chapel Hill after he returned to school, once in November of 1967 and once in April of 1968. The SBI tracked his changes in residence and his employment as he entered the corporate world after graduation in the following years. Those who knew Danny and Brenda generally did not believe Danny could have had anything to do with Brenda's murder. Whispers of his involvement, nevertheless, persisted throughout town, with the popular rumor maintaining that Danny left Manio at the end of the summer of 1967 and never returned, which some believed pointed towards his guilt. This was not true, however. Dan, as he was known once he began his successful career in business, vacationed in Dare County with his family regularly, with their last trip occurring just months before he passed away. He took his wife Diane and later their 2 children to see the Lost Colony. He told Diane about Brenda's murder and how police had tried to pin the crime on him. She does not believe that her husband could have returned to Manio, much less brought his family there, had he been involved. The 2 main emotions he seems to have felt about the events of the summer of 1967 were genuine confusion over how anyone could have wanted to harm Brenda and gratitude for his brother insisting he retain a lawyer when he did not know what to do in the face of intense interrogation. Dan was contacted by the SBI again in 1985 and 1995, and according to the SBI files, he was open and cooperative. He retired as Vice President of National Sales for Sara Lee Hosiery in 1994 and turned his attention back to his love of singing and performing. Dan Barber passed away unexpectedly in January of 2011, just days after his 68th birthday. While Dan Barber was the most popular suspect with law enforcement years after Brenda's murder, new information would point to a new suspect who had no connection to Brenda at all and no chance of being convicted of the crime, as he was by then long since deceased. For many years, Dr. Linus Edwards was the only dentist in Manio. On Valentine's Day of 1971, Dr. Edwards went to the home of Dr. Harvey, Manio's general practitioner, to drop off the set of dentures he had ordered. Dr. Harvey and his wife were at a Valentine's Day party but had left their front door unlocked. So Dr. Edwards went inside and left the dentures on the dining room table. Early that evening, Dr. Edwards made 3 phone calls, one to his lawyer, one to Sheriff Calhoun, and one to Dr. Harvey, asking them to come to his house. He then shot himself in the head with his .22 caliber pistol. His lawyer discovered him lying on his kitchen floor. When he arrived at the house an hour after being called there, Dr. Edwards was taken to the Naval Hospital in Norfolk, Virginia, where he remained unconscious until 5 a.m. on February 16th when he finally died. He did not leave a suicide note. Edwards was a native of Durham, North Carolina, and a member of Mensa, something he was very proud of. He served as a dentist with the United States Army, eventually reaching the rank of lieutenant colonel. Edwards was also a violent drunk. While Edwards was still in the Army, He once choked his wife so savagely and intently that her young daughter had to threaten him with a mallet to get him to stop. He was granted an honorable discharge after undergoing psychiatric treatment just 3 years before he would have been eligible for his full military pension. Edward's first wife, Ida, had divorced him after 20 years of marriage in 1956 and then remarried him in 1960, with this marriage lasting just a few years. It was during the second attempt at their marriage that Edwards came to Manio, which did not have a dental office at the time and opened a successful practice. Following his second divorce from Ida, Edwards married Dottie Fry, a young widow with 2 children and a long-standing family history in Manio. He and Dottie were married from 1964 until 1969, during which time Dottie was subjected to violence and abuse. Edwards physically beat his wife, at least once so badly that she needed to be hospitalized, and she and her children had to flee the home they shared with Edwards on multiple occasions. Edwards would regularly get blackout drunk, which would lead to physical and/or verbal abuse. While Edwards himself had an ongoing affair during the marriage, he was very jealous and controlling of Dottie's interactions with others. He did not like her having any friends, whether they were male or female. Edwards was briefly considered a suspect in Brenda's murder after investigators received tips that he and his wife, who bore a strong physical resemblance to Brenda Holland, had domestic difficulties on the night of June 30th and that he had drunkenly gone out that night looking for her after she fled their home. Edwards agreed to undergo a polygraph examination and passed. However, while these exams are notoriously unreliable under the best of circumstances, Edwards may also have had advantages that helped him appear truthful during the test. Just after the time Brenda was killed, he began wearing an upper body cast for some sort of unexplained neck or back injury, and he secured a prescription for Demerol. As John Rayleigh would later write, blackout drunks, free of feelings of guilt and zonked out on Demerol, as Edwards might have been, can sail through the tests. Early on in the investigation, Edwards told law enforcement that his wife probably wouldn't talk to them, so they did not attempt to contact her. She might not have been forthcoming at that time because she was afraid of her husband, but investigators simply taking Edwards at his word shows an unusual amount of deference. Edwards' car and home were never searched. Edwards was formally ruled out as a suspect in September, however. They were not as interested in hearing from her. Former Manio Police Chief Ken Whittingham never formally had jurisdiction over Brenda's case because her body had been found outside of city limits, but that did not diminish his interest in the case while he was with the department or after his departure from it in 1974. In 1979, while looking into the case on his own, Ken spoke to Dottie Fry. His notes indicate that on January 21st that year, she had told him that she had unsuccessfully tried to speak to both Sheriff Calhoun and an SBI agent named Lenny Wise multiple times about her ex-husband's potential involvement in Brenda's murder, but neither man was interested in speaking with her. It seemed to Dottie that they were both still convinced of Danny Barber's guilt. 6 years later, journalist Ray Pye was working on investigative pieces on Brenda's murder for the Outer Banks Current, and Ken was one of the people who spoke to him about the case. After learning about Ken's conversation with Dottie Fry, Ray contacted the SBI by phone in December of 1985 and told them of the importance of speaking with both Dottie and Ken. On April 7, 1986, almost 19 years after Brenda's murder, investigators finally interviewed Dottie Fry, and her statement provided important evidence pointing to her former husband being Brenda's killer. This interview was brief, and Dottie told her general theory of what she believed happened the night Brenda was killed, but she more fully elaborated on the events of that night in an article written by Ray Pye and published on August 7, 1986. Dottie's children spent a large part of their summers with their father's family in Carthage, North Carolina, some 200 miles away from Manio. So Dottie was alone with Edwards on the evening of June 30th, 1967 when he, not surprisingly, became belligerently drunk. He started yelling at Dottie, and she yelled back. He told her he was going to kill her. Dottie decided not to stay to see if he meant it. She fled the house before the altercation became physical. She got into her van and went to pick up her best friend. They drove around for the rest of the night, making a few stops throughout the Manio area. At least the beginning of Dottie's account was corroborated by 2 of her neighbors. Because her windows had been open that night, their neighbors heard the fight Edwards threatening Dottie, and Dottie's van driving away. They also later heard Edwards' car driving away. At least one of Dottie's friends also reported Edwards showing up at her house and angrily looking through each room in the home for Dottie that night. Dottie waited a few days for her husband to sober up before returning home. When Edwards came home and saw her there, he went pale and said, "I thought you were dead." According to Dottie, Edwards would later claim to have killed Brenda Holland on multiple occasions while he was intoxicated. Dottie believed her former husband killed Brenda in the case of mistaken identity. Husband killed Brenda in a case of mistaken identity. While Dottie was older than Brenda, both women were tall and thin, with long necks and bobbed blonde hair. If Edwards had come across Brenda from behind as she was walking home from Danny Barber's home, in his intoxicated state and with his headlights as his only source of light, he may have thought that Brenda was Dottie and attacked her, as he had a long history of doing to his wife. With so little light and in such an inebriated state, he may not have noticed that he had killed a different woman even after he strangled her, potentially with the braided rope straps of her handbag. Still drunk and still without light, he conceivably still could have believed the woman he killed was Dottie, even after putting her body in his car and taking it to a nearby bridge to throw it into the water. Edwards also would have had reason to believe his wife would have been in the neighborhood where he theoretically came across Brenda. Dottie was friends with both of Danny Barber's housemates and worked with one of them. Edwards did not like that his wife was friends with a young man and may have been in that area that night checking to see if she were at their house. Dottie had, in fact, stopped at the house earlier in the evening during her drive around town with her best friend. No one was at the house when she arrived, so she took a beer from the fridge and left a note before leaving. Edwards' behavior seems to indicate that, for a time, he did believe that he had killed his wife. He had his mistress come over to the home he shared with Dottie, which was not something he typically did. Neighbors saw her car at his house on Sunday. Edwards went to the sheriff's office around 1 a.m. on the morning of Sunday, July 2nd, to report his wife missing, but claimed that she had left home after an argument just a few hours earlier when she had actually left more than 24 hours earlier. After making his report, he went home and went to bed after about 20 minutes, potentially indicating that he was not actually concerned about anything authorities might find looking for Dottie, and that he had just made the report with the incorrect timeline to make it appear as though he was appropriately concerned for his wife. He was never questioned about the inconsistencies between his timeline and the statements of his neighbors, despite the fact that they were obvious and known to investigators well before Edwards was cleared as a suspect. Former Sheriff Cahoon, who had retired a few years before Dottie Fry's claims were made public, did not support the theory that Brenda's murder had been the result of mistaken identity, arguing that Brenda had been smothered with a pillow or blanket, indicating he was still a proponent of the theory that she had been killed in someone, presumably Danny Barber's, house. However, the pathologist had found that Brenda had been strangled, not suffocated, and no evidence contradicted that finding. Brenda's family was not notified when Dottie made her statement to the SBI. They only learned of this alternative suspect in the case when a relative happened to read the newspaper article Ray Pye wrote after speaking with Dottie. The family had still received periodic phone calls from Sheriff Cahoon as the years passed, but he always told them that Danny Barber was the most likely suspect and they simply lacked enough evidence to file charges against him. Brenda's murder devastated her family, affecting her siblings and her parents in different but profound and painful ways. Her father, Charles, believing Sheriff Calhoun's assertion of Danny's probable guilt, grew angry with the sheriff for failing to make the case against the young man. He would also express his regret over not exacting revenge against the man he believed killed his daughter. Neither of Brenda's parents would live to see their daughter's case resolved. Charles Holland passed away in 2003, and his wife Geraldine followed a decade later. They are both buried near Brenda in their family plot. In 2018, in response to a series of articles written by John Rayleigh for the Coastland Times about Brenda's murder, the SBI assigned a specialized cold case investigator to the case. Unfortunately, Brenda's case may not benefit from the passage of time and the advancement of science the same way other older cases have in recent years. Problems with the evidence in Brenda's case began almost as soon as the investigation did. The necklace she always wore was removed, rinsed, and photographed after she was pulled from the water. The The necklace was then given to her father just a few hours later. While this was, of course, an act of kindness towards Charles Holland, the necklace would have been of great evidentiary importance, especially given the fact that it was determined that Brenda had been strangled. The clothes Brenda was found wearing were washed shortly after her body was found, potentially eliminating trace evidence along with the strong smell that most likely led to them being cleaned. This is not currently relevant, however, as the clothes could not be tested now regardless of them having been washed. All of the physical evidence from Brenda's case has been lost. Previously, physical evidence from cases the SBI was involved in remained stored at the SBI laboratory. Following a policy change, evidence in these cases was returned to the local law enforcement agencies with whom the cases originated. It is not clear if the evidence from Brenda's case went missing while it was in the custody of the SBI or at the Deer County Sheriff's Office. It is not unheard of for evidence from older cases to be intentionally destroyed, but there is no record of this occurring, and it would be unusual for evidence from a case that had received so much statewide attention to have been destroyed. Ongoing efforts to solve the case are also hampered by the fact that there are no photos from the crime scene or of Brenda's body to examine. According to notes from the FBI file, a state trooper took photographs at the scene near where Brenda's body was found, but the exposures were all blank when they were developed. Renowned local photographer Acock Brown also took photographs at the scene, and 2 witnesses have reported seeing the photos in the past, but the current whereabouts of the photos are unknown. They are not with the case files or with Mr. Brown's private collection of his photographs, which was donated to the Outer Banks History Center. No photos from Brenda's autopsy in Virginia can be located either. While the evidence against Dr. Linus Edwards is only circumstantial, Brenda's younger sister, Kim Holland Thorne, believes he is most likely the killer and that his connections to local law enforcement influenced the investigation into Brenda's murder. After speaking with Dottie and others in Manio, I concluded that Sheriff Calhoun's friendship with Dr. Edwards kept the whole truth from being divulged. When Dr. Edwards committed suicide, there was sort of an attitude of let sleeping dogs lie, she told the Raleigh News and Observer in 1997. Investigative efforts on the case did seem to die down following Edwards' death, except for the SBI keeping track of where Danny Barber was living and working. Kim Thorne has asked that the FBI formally declare Edwards as Brenda's killer based on Dottie Fry's statements, but the agency has not agreed to do so. They did offer to close Brenda's case without identifying her murderer, but Kim will not stand for that. I said, "Oh, hell no. It will not be closed until you say who the killer was," she said in 2018. She furthermore wants both her sister and the consequences of unprofessionalism to not be forgotten. "I want it remembered. I want it at the top of the list for unsolved murders in North Carolina. They need to remember that sometimes the good old boys club doesn't work and it's wrong," she told WTKR News in 2018. Brenda's memory, of course, lives on in the hearts and minds of her family and friends, but they hope to preserve her memory in Manio as well. For several years, there have been efforts to get a plaque memorializing Brenda installed somewhere on the property where the Lost Colony continues to be performed each summer. This process has been complicated by the fact that the property is a part of the National Park Service and subject to certain rules and regulations. Hopefully, these issues can be resolved so that whether or not her case is ever solved, Brenda can be remembered by all of those who come to see the play that, tragically, showcased her final work more than 50 years ago. 56-year-old John Lazaro lived in Rochdale, a suburb south of Brisbane. On April 11, 2012, he was in the living room of his home when 2 masked men burst inside and shot him multiple times. His 19-year-old daughter witnessed the shooting but was not harmed during the attack. She was able to immediately call for help, but despite her quick action, her father did not survive his injuries. John's dog, a Rottweiler mix named Kilo, was also shot during the attack but survived after undergoing surgery. Police would later describe John's murder as a brutal execution. While his murderers clearly targeted him, investigators could find no motive for the crime, despite interviewing more than 150 individuals in connection to their investigation. Years went on without an arrest in John's case. Police made a renewed appeal to the public for information in April of 2022, on the 10th anniversary of John's murder. At this time, they also released CCTV footage taken near John's home at the time of the murder. The footage shows a tray-back utility vehicle speeding away. The footage was taken less than 100 yards away from John's home, just moments after the time he was shot. Due to how quickly the vehicle left the scene, investigators believe that at least 3 people were involved in the crime, the 2 shooters and a getaway driver. A major break in the case came just months later in June of 2022 when authorities announced that they had located the gun used to kill John. Ballistics testing had confirmed that it was the weapon used in the case. The firearm in question was an unregistered Browning 1932 caliber semi-automatic. The 45-year-old man from New South Wales, who had been in possession of the gun, was questioned by authorities, and his home was searched. The weapon had been in the possession of numerous individuals since 2012, making it difficult to tie it to the person responsible for John's murder. However, Detective Acting Inspector Daniel Cunningham has stated that the discovery of the weapon has accelerated the investigation. Inquiries into the various individuals who had been in possession of the weapon are ongoing. When announcing the discovery of the gun, Queensland Police also stated that they now believe that the shooters had ties to the Bandidos outlaw motorcycle gang. John himself was not involved with the gang. Investigators are hoping that the quickly shifting loyalties amongst gangs like the Bandidos will result in someone with information finally coming forward. There is a $500,000 reward being offered for information that ties all of the new clues and information together to finally solve John's case. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.